Hi guys. So we've done a demo for a customer to illustrate the power of the Microsoft platform, primarily around CDS and Flow and the interaction of those different services triggered by one of these. So I'm going to give you a quick run through of the demo that we did for our customer. And I think it's a really powerful way of illustrating how well the platform hangs together. So let's move over to the environment. So what we have used as the endpoint for this particular demonstration is VATSense, which provides a VAT number set of methods for VAT number validation. The one that we've kind of sampled here is the validator VAT number, which is executed through giving the service a VAT number through a query string within the URL, and then it return back a JSON response. So to test how all of that hangs together and works, I used Postman to do this initially. So what we did here was created a new collection. And then within the connection itself, we created a new request. So if we go back to the actual website here, we can see that it's a GET request. And then we can see that this is the URL, and also there's basic authentication associated to this request. So we will create this validation check request here, make sure it's writing into the right collection within Postman so we know where it is. We can refer back to it later if we need to. And now let's have a look at the query itself. So the first thing that we need to do here is add basic authentication. Now, I've already, as part of a previous sample of this, I've already created an authorization associated to a VAT check collection. So it's picked that up here, and we've got my username and password for this service. So all that we need to do now is add in the sample URL that VATSense give to you. Put that into the get method here, and it auto populates the parameters here. So this is a parameter of the query that we're sending over, and we'll send that off and just make sure that it's working. So this is returned a result for us here, and it's important that we keep this open. We don't want to lose this because we're going to need this later on when we start to build the connectors in the Power Platform. So with that, let's move over to Power Apps. And now the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create these connections that we're going to need within our application. So the first thing that we're going to do is create the custom connector. And we'll call this one VAT Checker. I've got an image pre-prepared for this, which is the VATSense image. So we'll upload that here and give the custom connector an image to use. We're going to be connecting over HTTPS. The next part of what we need here is to grab the host and base URL. So the host here, we're using this part of the host. We're not interested in any of the protocol definition. All we want is the actual host domain. And then the base URL is then, for VATSense, is then this element here, which is the 1.0. So we need both the leading and the trailing slashes plus the 1.0 there. We'll put that in. And then next we'll move on to authentication. So we already know that this is basic authentication. This is not asking us for the username and password at this point. This is just for the field names. So we'll put in here user, and we'll put in here password, so we can move on to the next step. And now the next step is all about defining the action. So we'll create a new action. And for the purposes of the demo, I'm just going to call all of these the same. Validate all of these, and the final one here, operation ID, is capitalized. So the custom connector creation tool does moan if that is not a capitalized leading letter. So it's easy just to do that up front. Visibility, we're not worried about that at the moment. So the first element of this that we're going to build is the request. And this is really good. This allows you to import request information from samples that you provide to it. So the thing that we're interested in here is a GET, because that's the protocol that this uses. Let's go and do that into here. We put the full message in, and by providing all of the query string parameters as well, what this actually does for us when we import this is it goes and gets, it actually pre-populates the query string parameters for you within the custom connector, which is a really cool little feature. The response will do exactly the same thing. So we kept this open before, so we've got our response object here that's come back from the service. So if we just grab that and stick it into this body here, and then import. There's no headers to worry about for this, so we're just importing the body elements. And it's not changed any of this because it's just the default structure for the JSON, whereas if you've got more complex JSON, it'll actually break this down for you. But the validation succeeded at this point, so now we can go on to test this connector. So we create it. Now, what this is now going to ask us for is connections. So when I click on this button here, it's going to prompt me to enter the connections into this service, which is actually going to drop me off to another part of the Power Platform custom connector creation tool here. As I mentioned earlier, what we actually did in the security section is define what those fields are called, whereas now we actually need to populate them with the actual connection details that are provided to us in this scenario by VatSense. So we'll go to new connection here, and the user for the demo licenses with VatSense is just user. And I'm just going to go to my dashboard, and I'm just going to grab that, which is then my password. We'll create that into there. It'll add that connection, and now we've got our connection. Now to carry on where we were and actually test that the custom connector works, we need to go back to custom connectors, and we need to go to edit in here and go to the test element of this. And we're going to use, for the purposes of the test right now, we're just going to use the VAT number that we initially used within Postman, just to make sure we're actually getting a response back. So we'll test that operation, and there we go. We've got a code 200, which means it's been successful, and we've gone and validated that request, and we've got the true response back to say that that is actually a valid VAT number in this scenario. There's a few more connections that we now need to go and create. So if we go over to the connections element, so we can see VAT checker is there already. We're actually going to trigger this demonstration using a Flic button. So let's add the Flic connector. I've already got an account with them, so it's going to pre-populate my details in here and log me in. So that's that bit done. And then also we're going to add a new connection into CDS. Now, this is the newer version of the CDS connectors within Power Platform. The advantage of using the current environment one here is that it will actually default to the current environment. So this becomes really useful when you're deploying any of these tools across different environments through the life cycle of a project, because it will always pick up the current environment. So that's really Microsoft's recommended connector to use here anyway, but we're definitely going to use that one. So let's add that into the solution. Okay, so now we've built all the framework of what we're going to do here. We're actually going to go and start a flow. Actually, before we do, we're going to go and create an entity. So I'm in a CDS only environment here. There's no CRM environment connected to this. So what you're looking at here is all of the default entities that come as part of a standard CDS or Power Apps environment. So what I'm going to add into here is an entity specific for the purpose of testing this solution. So wait for that to go. So we'll call this checker. Okay, create that. And what this will do is this has gone and created that entity for us now. Name is the default kind of standard field that we need to have here. So this is what's used to identify all the different records. We're going to actually add another field, and we'll call that valid. So this is going to be populated once we've run through our flow, and it's actually validated whether this information is true or not. So we'll click done there. And then we'll save that entity. Just before we move away from this page and start building our flow, what we're going to do, for the purposes of the demo, is we're going to open this data in Excel, and we're going to populate the name field of the record with an actual valid VAT number. So I work for a company called Alpha People in the UK, so I'm going to use our VAT number to do this. Just sign into here. Okay, whilst that's just logging me in, I'm just going to go and find our VAT number. Here we go. And we'll add that into the name field here. And then we will publish that up. Okay. And you'll see that's automatically populated a few other fields as well to set the status of record and created on. And when we get a response back later on, when we reopen this file later on, we'll have a value populated in the valid field as well. So we'll close that for now. And we'll just check that that data has actually been written. So if we go to the data tab at the top of here, we can see that we've got our first record. So this is the record I've just created. So now if we go to flows, and the first thing we need to do as part of the flow is go and create a trigger. So the trigger that we're interested in using here is the Flic button. So we'll go and create that. And we'll do it on press event here. So we need to, we've created the connection already into Flic, but we need to actually set that as part of this flow here. So there we go. There's the Flic, and the events that can trigger this this flow to begin from the Flic functionality are any of these here. We're going to keep it on any, so then it doesn't matter whether I single click, double click, or hold the button down. It will trigger this process. So we'll go for any there. Okay. So the next thing that we want to do once we've actually triggered this process is we want to go and list all of the records that are within CDS that belong to this collection of VAT checker. So we're going to go and list the CDS records. So we'll grab a list of records here. So this will give us back a collection of records. There'll only be one because we're going to get one in there, but it gives back a collection. And you'll see that the CDS connector here has picked up all of the environments or current. So we're just going to use current here because this is the one that we're interested in. And then the entity name is VAT checkers. There we go. And that's all we need to do for that entry there. So then the next step that we want to do, now, as I said before, list records gives you back a collection of records. So to make sure that we're actually iterating through that, if there's more than one, we're going to go and execute the apply to each logic here. And that will be run against the body returned, the value, returned as part of the list records step. And then based on the value that we've got back, we actually want to go and get the individual record. So we'll go back to Common Data Service and we'll use this top one here, get record. And again, we're using the current environment. The entity that we want to query here is VAT checkers. And the item identifier that we're looking to use to validate this is this unique identifier at the bottom for VAT checker. Okay. Now, what this will actually do at this point is return us back some JSON. So if I just save this here, and if we just test this flow right now. So I'm going to click the button, and we'll go and execute this flow. And all being well, in that final step, we'll have a blob of JSON, which we will then need to use the parse JSON control to go and parse that into usable data. So we'll grab a copy of that, and I'll just stick that into a notepad. That's into a notepad elsewhere. And then we've got that ready to go. So let's go back to editing that flow. So now what we want to do is we want to parse that. So let's parse that JSON. And we're using the body of the get record. So the get record is the previous step. We want to use the body of that. And we want to copy that schema into the sample payload entry here. Okay, so this is the payload that we just copied across before. Click done to that. So now we're able to parse that JSON. The next thing we need to actually do is call our custom connector, which is going to go and validate whether that VAT number is actually valid or not. So I want to use that. And the VAT number that we want to check here is the one that we're going to pull out of CDS. So we used the name field on the CDS record, so that's exactly what we're going to use here to validate. And then the final thing that we want to do is actually push that back into CDS. So this is really simulating what will be happening within if you had CRM sitting behind the scenes here, and it was enabled in we were retrieving that data from CRM rather than CDS. Exactly the same thing will be happening. We'll be able to go and retrieve the field, validate it, and push it back into CRM again to say whether that's a valid VAT number or not. So we're going to update the record. The entity, so the environment is current again. The entity is the VAT checker. The record identifier is our, so we're using get record because we want to just do it on the individual record as part of this step. So we're going to scroll right down to the bottom of here, and we want that. And then this only gives you the option, as default, it hides a load of fields down here. So this only gives you the option of updating name. If you click on this little show advanced options here, it'll give you the rest of the fields that you can update. And then we want to go and actually stick in the results of this valid check. Okay, so that is our flow complete. So if we save this now, and let's test that again. I'm going to click the button. That'll go and trigger this flow to execute. It'll take a second just to run through all of those steps. And there we go, successful. And we can expand these out and we can actually have a look at all the results here. And one of the nice things about this valid check here is because we've used, we've kind of structured this as a custom connector. All of these outputs can be used individually. So what you could use here is you could pass into this tool a VAT number and it give you back the company name and address, or alternatively you could give it a company name and address and it provides you with a VAT number. You can't do some of this with the free service, which is what I'm using here to test this, but it just shows how easy it is to connect all of these things together and start retrieving information and validating information. And this final step here is telling us that we've got an update of the record. So to check whether that's actually happened or not, let's go back to entities. And if we go down to our VAT checker entity, and let's have a look at that data in Excel again. And we'll enable editing, which will then log us back into CDS. And there we go. So there's our original VAT number that we checked, and it's valid. And it's also populated some of the other information within this record as well, based on the steps that have been taken. So that's it. That is a demo of using an IoT device like a Flic to control a flow and using custom connectors to go and retrieve information from other data sources.